The question of a child's safety can have an unforgettable, chilling answer. A small English town, December 2012. Its fallout would reshape national law and halt the British Parliament. The conclusion of this case reveals critical warning signs every person should recognize. It provides a blueprint for how such a tragedy might be averted in the future. This account exists to give a voice to the children who were silenced, ensuring their stories are never forgotten. He professed his innocence but appeared completely lost and directionless. It was understood to be Paul's final opportunity to present his version of events. He refused the chance, acting on legal advice and insisting he was a victim of persecution. Confused, he deferred entirely to his sister's judgment, lacking any other plan. Inside the interrogation room, his willingness to cooperate was questioned. The process was grueling for him, a relentless repetition of agonizing details. It was torturous for him to hear the facts of the case laid bare before others. The clinical recitation of medical evidence concerned his own daughter. The narrative of Poppie is harrowing, yet these cases fundamentally alter our perception of the world. The reach of these accounts is tracked, noting the locations where they are being seen. It is significant to document how widely these narratives disseminate. Wider awareness is crucial for child safety. The investigation begins now. In northwest England sits the port of Barrow-in-Furness, a place of familiar faces and a slow, steady rhythm. In communities like this, interpersonal trust runs deeper than in any metropolis, and it is precisely this placid surface that can mask a dangerous reality. On a quiet street, in an unremarkable house, lived the Worthingtons, Paul and his partner. Their children and routines appeared, from the outside, indistinguishable from any other neighborhood family. Neighbors offered passing greetings, children played outside, and officials conducted routine checks, then left. Every detail presented the illusion of perfect normalcy. This illusion, it would later be learned, was the case's most chilling lesson. On January 5, 2011, a daughter was born to the Worthingtons. They named her Poppie, and by her mother's account, she was an extraordinary infant from the start. She did not merely observe the people around her. She seemed to study them, her large, dark eyes recording every detail she witnessed. Sleep came only while holding her mother's finger in the quiet of the evenings. To her mother, the world seemed to contract to the size of that tiny, warm hand. At night, Poppie resisted letting go of her grip. She would lie awake, gazing up, seemingly fearful of missing a moment of her new world. The familiar sight of her stroller became a fixture on neighborhood walks. She regarded strangers with open curiosity, her dimpled smile invariably returned by all who saw it. She entered the world vibrant, healthy, and seemingly full of promise. All signs pointed to a long life. By 3 months old, she communicated in her own unique way. She made soft, melodic sounds when observing her older siblings. Her focused gaze tracked their every action, betraying a clear eagerness to join them. In these moments, the family would stop, captivated by an infant who brought an undeniable warmth to the room. By 6 months, her personality emerged, reaching for bright objects and grasping toys in her hands. A falling tower of blocks would always elicit her laughter. Her constant companion was a stuffed bear, its fur already worn thin from her embrace. Her dimple appeared so frequently that neighbors believed she smiled even in her sleep. For Poppie, food was an adventure. She regarded new foods with a deep-seated suspicion that nearly always gave way to fascination. Bananas were a particular point of interest, and after each feeding, a telling amount of the fruit would coat her face, a detail that reliably amused the family. She would command her high chair in the kitchen, striking a plastic spoon against the tray, as if directing the proceedings of the entire household. A small but central figure at every meal. When Poppie reached 1 year old in January of 2012, the family marked the occasion with a cake. There were gifts and the specific kind of warmth that materializes only at a young child's birthday. The subject of the celebration was oblivious to the meaning of the event, but the brightly colored wrapping paper was a source of profound sensory delight. She crumpled it repeatedly, the packaging itself eclipsing the presence within as the adults documented the moment. By then, Poppie could already stand with confidence, her hands gripping the coffee table as she faced the camera with an expression of unsettling awareness. She was captivated by the opening themes of children's television programs, bouncing in her crib at the first note of a familiar melody, particularly the introduction to In the Night Garden. It induced the same state of wide-eyed wonder each time, as if it were a completely new experience. By the summer of 2012, Poppie had become a determined explorer. She moved with purpose from room to room and had already solved the problem of the stairs. Her first independent steps were taken along the wall, each new distance a small, triumphant achievement. Her older siblings served as both instructors and an audience, sitting on the floor around her. They would construct block towers, waiting for the inevitable moment she would topple them, then joining her in applause. A small park nearby was a frequent destination, a place Poppie visited several times a week. She could observe birds for long, uninterrupted periods, pointing toward the sky and mimicking their calls. In these moments, her mother would simply stand and watch, attempting to fix the image in her memory. The texture of the grass, the sound of the wind, the figures of birds on the branches. To Poppie, these were elements of a fundamental magic she was discovering for the first time, every time. With the arrival of autumn, the walks became shorter, the light beginning to fade earlier each day. This change seemed to have no effect on Poppie. She accepted the heavy sweaters and wool hats her mother dressed her in, her appearance so striking that it would often cause neighbors to pause. At 13 months old, she was the archetype of a child at that stage of development, inquisitive, vibrant, and utterly captivated by the world she was just beginning to understand. December descended upon Barrow-in-Furness, riding a cold wind from the bay, and holiday lights started to appear in the windows of the homes nearby. Poppie's reaction to the seasonal decorations was instinctual and absolute. She reached for every illuminated strand. She would freeze before the decorated tree that stood in the corner of the room, her gaze fixed on the lights, her eyes reflecting their shimmering colors. It was her first Christmas with any level of awareness, and her siblings competed to explain it all, presenting cards and ornaments, feeding off her reactions. During this period, observers noted nothing out of the ordinary. The household maintained its established rhythm. Poppie was occasionally seen through the window, and life appeared to proceed as expected. The last people to see her recall a completely typical child, a cheerful toddler with a noticeable dimple playing on the floor, her laughter as constant as ever. There was no external sign that these were her final days, or that the December lights she found so mesmerizing would be her last. On the night spanning December 11th to the 12th, a stillness fell over the house, the kind that settles over all homes on a cold winter evening. Her mother was asleep on the ground floor. Poppie was upstairs, in the bedroom of her father, Paul Worthington. That one fact, so unremarkable on its face, would become the focal point of years of legal inquiry, a question the justice system could never definitively resolve. If the details of this case have already resonated with you, it is advised you save this file so you may return to it and review the evidence with others. What comes next is the most crucial segment of the record, the part that details why the Poppie Worthington case fundamentally altered the nation's laws. The record continues. At 5:48 in the morning, an emergency call was placed from the Worthington residence. When paramedics arrived on the scene and assessed the child, they took a step that was highly unusual for first responders. The call to law enforcement went out before she ever reached the emergency room. These were seasoned first responders, veterans of countless crises. But what they witnessed that morning defied any explanation of natural causes or mishap. At Furness General Hospital, where Poppie arrived at 6:11 in the morning, the on-call medical staff launched a desperate effort. For over an hour, they battled to save her, but the subsequent medical findings were chillingly clear. The evidence documented by physicians was irrefutable. At 7:07 in the morning on December 12, 2012, Poppie Worthington was pronounced dead. The child, who only days before had marveled at Christmas lights, was lost forever at just 13 months of age, and the sole adult present during her final hours was her father, Paul Worthington. He offered no explanation for the one question that haunted everyone: what transpired in that room between father and daughter? From Cumbria, correspondent Paul McNamara reports. Authorities escorted a hooded Worthington into the coroner's court, his identity shielded amidst reports of threats against his life. Paul Worthington had fiercely resisted the in-person appearance, requesting a video link that was ultimately denied, though he was granted a screen to conceal him from public view. The ensuing events would send shockwaves through the United Kingdom, rivaling the initial tragedy. Cumbria police responded, but the investigation was fundamentally flawed from its inception. Crucial forensic evidence was never properly secured. Grave procedural errors compromised the scene, irretrievably losing what might have illuminated the night's events. It was the second time the system had catastrophically failed the child. First, in life, by failing to protect her, and then, in death, by failing to uncover the truth. The conduct was described as a disgrace. An independent police commission launched its own inquiry, concluding the initial response was a systemic professional failure. It was revealed the responding officers lacked the specialized training required for such a sensitive case. In a statement released this morning, the Crown Prosecution Service confirmed it would not pursue criminal charges in the death of 13-month-old Poppie Worthington in December 2012. Several related proceedings, including a coroner's inquest and internal reviews, remain pending. An official commented, "I can now address the matter and will offer the following statement. I have reviewed all reports on the initial handling of the investigation by the Cumbria Constabulary. It is unequivocally clear that the Constabulary's initial response failed to meet the required and expected standard of professionalism. More damning still was Judge Peter Jackson's later finding that a substantive investigation only commenced 9 months after the child's death. 9 months. During that critical delay, vital evidence vanished, a point Poppie's mother's attorney made bluntly in court. Were the circumstances not so tragic, he stated, the police actions might be called a comedy of errors. But this was no mere bureaucratic blunder. At the heart of it was a small child with a single dimple, and a justice system that would ultimately fail her. The case evolved into a years-long legal saga, one of the most convoluted in modern British judicial history. An initial inquest in October of 2014 concluded in just 7 minutes, hearing no testimony and failing to determine a cause of death, a process later deemed a grave procedural error by the High Court. Then, in January of 2016, Judge Peter Jackson delivered a pivotal family court ruling, concluding that the father was, on the balance of probabilities, responsible for the events of that night. Worthington maintained his innocence, yet the subsequent proceedings became emblematic of a systemic collapse. Over a 2-day period, he systematically refused to answer the questions put to him. He did so 252 times. One of the few he did answer was a request to describe Poppie. Lively, bubbly, he said, the happy one. Twice the Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file, and twice they determined the evidence was insufficient for a criminal case. The forensic evidence, lost in those critical opening hours, had sealed the case's fate. A criminal trial was now a virtual impossibility. A final inquest in late 2017 presented the last chance for an official truth. Across 3 weeks of hearings, Paul Worthington chose silence, declining to answer 252 times. By January of 2018, the coroner's 87-page ruling outlined his conclusions, yet key evidence was missing, preventing a verdict of unlawful death. No charges were ever filed in Poppie Worthington's death, but he was not the only one whose testimony was heard. Several police officers from the investigation were also called to the stand. A consistent theme emerged from their testimony: profound failure. The crime scene was never secured. Critical evidence, like bedding and laptops, was not collected. Samples were never sent for analysis. The grim irony is that the system that failed Poppie was ultimately remade because of her. The investigation uncovered catastrophic failings inside the Cumbria police force, leading to a leadership overhaul and a full departmental audit. A National Constabulary Inspectorate conducted its own review, publishing a report that soon became mandatory reading for police departments nationwide. The scrutiny extended beyond law enforcement to Cumbria's social services. An official inspection deemed their work inadequate, forcing direct government oversight. New protocols mandated communication between medical staff, social workers, and police. From that moment on, any red flag would trigger a multi-agency review, cutting the red tape that had failed Poppie. Poppie Worthington's name is now required teaching for new officers and social workers across the United Kingdom. Her case is a study in systemic collapse. Her story grew beyond a private tragedy. It became a catalyst for reforms credited with preventing other similar tragedies. The child from Barrow-in-Furness found no justice in life, but her name would alter a nation's laws. In Parliament, the government acknowledged the grave issues raised. The issue was pressed. The children's minister was recognized for his work confronting these systemic failings. Officials confirmed that urgent points had been raised and would be addressed through direct correspondence. There was also an additional offer made. A private meeting was proposed for the affected constituents' representative to discuss the profound ramifications. But before examining the final, critical lesson, it is vital to understand why these stories must be told, and why what follows truly matters. Each account of systemic failure holds a similar weight, each a cautionary tale. These are the narratives that possess the power to make a genuine difference. Poppie Worthington's case was more than a family's loss. It was a mirror held up to the system itself. In its reflection, it saw how routine indifference at every level could prove fatal for a child. The primary lesson is that an appearance of calm is not an assurance of safety. Beneath the surface of a clean home or a neat report, a grave danger can lurk. It reveals itself only to those who are willing to look closer. For any parent, neighbor, or teacher, for anyone paying attention, a child's behavioral shifts are a critical signal. Withdrawal, fear, or sudden anxiety can be a silent cry for help. These are not signs to be dismissed as a bad mood or fatigue, and then forgotten. It is always better to voice a concern to a child's safety hotline and be mistaken than to remain silent when a child is in peril. Poppie Worthington's life lasted just 13 months. She was a child who loved birds and falling towers, who slept holding her mother's finger alive and full of trust. Her story must be more than just a file in a court archive. The case left a chilling testament. The duty to protect a child could not be delegated. It was a collective weight. The story of Poppie Worthington is not merely a chronicle of systemic failure. It is a haunting reminder that our most sacred duty is the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Within the silent walls of that Barrow-in-Furness home, a vibrant life was extinguished, leaving behind a void that no legal reform can ever truly fill. The most chilling lesson we must carry forward is this: normalcy is often a mask. A clean house, a steady rhythm, and a quiet neighborhood can hide a desperate, silent plea for help. We must move beyond the comfort of minding our own business and embrace a culture of radical vigilance. If you see a child's laughter fade into withdrawal or witness a spark of curiosity replaced by fear, do not look away. Your intuition is a lifeline. It is infinitely better to raise an alarm that turns out to be a mistake than to remain silent while a child is in peril. Poppie's legacy must be our collective conscience. We owe it to every child held in the balance to be their voice, their shield, and their sanctuary. Let us transform our grief into action, ensuring that never again is not just a phrase, but a promise kept.